in the vast expanse of 19th century Africa, amidst the shadow of tall trees and the hush of wild rivers. One man's footsteps echoed louder than most. Tippu Tip. Not just a trader, but a warrior, a leader, and an empire builder. His journey through Central and East Africa was one punctuated by ambition, rivalry, and a fierce drive to control the ivory trade. As he once proclaimed, "I have fought many battles, and I know the cost of blood." One of his final confrontations, the brutal skirmish at Kasongo, epitomized his unyielding spirit and the sheer magnitude of the stakes he would play for. Often during his life, even from distant villages, rhythmic drum beats would be sounded out, echoing ancient songs of defiance, their pulsating cadence filling the thick tropical air, challenging Tippu Tip's reign. The bustling chatter of local traders, their bartered goods, and stories crossing borders was now silenced by the palpable anticipation of an inevitable clash. Whenever rival Arab factions began to mobilize, Tippu Tip always found himself ready. His vast trading empire, built on savvy diplomacy and occasional force, would often find itself threatened by both external enemies and internal dissent. Tippu Tip, fueled by visions of unmatched power and dominion, was never one to shy away from a challenge. With fire in his eyes, he would often command armies and mercenaries to dispatch his enemies. But what brought Tippu Tip to this precipice of power and peril? Was he a mere merchant with an insatiable appetite for territory, or did his ambitions reflect the broader socio-political currents of his time? And when will Samuel L. Jackson portray this man in a movie? Join us today on Historical Quarrels as we unravel the enigma of Tippu Tip. We'll delve into the deep heart of Africa, tracing the footprints of a man whose very name became synonymous with the era's trade and trepidation. Fellow quarrelers, strap in as we journey into a chapter of African history that challenges our conventional understanding, shedding light on both the man and the myths surrounding him on today's Historical Quarrel. Welcome back to Historical Quarrels, everyone. I hope y'all's week was a good one, and I'm so glad you're here. Quick disclaimer before I begin anything: this show is NSFW, and you maybe shouldn't listen to this where little kids can hear it, unless you like having little kids say some really fucked up shit. In which case, I guess go ahead. But I'm not telling you to do that. But like, if you do, that's just something that you like doing. Maybe go talk to someone. So yeah, I mean, if you're expecting this show to, if you're tuning in and are a new listener and you're expecting this show just to be just the information, kind of boring, I'm going to go over a lot of like facts. Then maybe, your expectations were a little too high for me. So just give up there and accept that this show is not that. I will joke about some god awful things. Slavery is a big topic in today's episode because that was what was being traded back in Central Africa back in the 1800s, quite a bit. So, but today we're going to be focusing on Tippu Tip and his quarrels that he has establishing his trade empire during that time in Central Africa. A really interesting tale. His life story is it was full of interesting stories and battles that I think you guys will enjoy. I certainly enjoyed it. As always, other quick announcements are stereotypical news episode just released last Thursday. I think it was a pretty good one. We had our guest, Ashley Francis, who is the host of the Passion podcast, who I did an interview with a while ago. And that episode of us is out on her channel on the Passion podcast. So go check that out if you want to hear me talk about why I like doing the show so much and why I like history so much. We can have an in-depth conversation over there with her. You should check out her other episodes too. They're super cool, super interesting. Let's see. Other than that, no other big announcements. Oh, yesterday was my birthday. I'm recording this on the 20th, but my birthday is the 19th of August. And so I had a good day. My wife had some friends come over, and I got a little fucked up to the point where I couldn't really like I didn't know where I was for a second. It was kind of crazy. So, you know, I had a good time. I woke up and I felt really relaxed, even though like the first part of my night seemed to be a little too wild for than I like to normally have it be, which was fun. It was interesting. It was a good day. But yeah, so just so you guys know, quick rundown of how today's episode's going to work. As always, we're going to go first kind of over some background information for the area and understand how Tippu Tip's family would become, you know, this successful merchant family, and how he would take that merchant family and turn it into an empire, essentially. And then we'll go over Tippu Tip's life story, go over some of the battles he was in, just kind of talk about a few important key events that happened as well during the time. And then we'll talk about the aftermath and any issues that were caused from it. You know, just anything that we can really go over. We'll talk about that. So enough dilly-dallying. Let's go ahead and get right into today's historical quarrel. So to understand how Tippu Tip's family would become successful merchants, we need to journey back through the intricate socio-economic and political fabric of the 18th and early 19th century Zanzibar and the Swahili coast as well. So I'm going to kind of give you a general timeline here. From the late 1600s to the early 1700s is where we'd have the Swahili resistance. So in the later part of the 17th century, the Swahili coast began to see an unprecedented surge in trade and commerce. This period, often referred to as the Swahili resistance, was characterized by a flourishing culture, flourishing of culture, commerce, and connectivity that bridged the vast expanses of the Indian Ocean. The coast, stretching from present-day Somalia to Mozambique, had always been an active trading zone due to its strategic location. However, during this era, the trade network expanded exponentially. The sophisticated Swahili city-states with their cosmopolitan ports like Mombasa, Kilwa, and Sofala became magnets for merchant ships from as far as India, Persia, and the Arabian Peninsula. So this place essentially became this huge trading hub because of everything that happens. So here are some factors that contributed to this boom, right? So they had some insane technological advancements. They had enhanced maritime technology and navigation techniques that made long-distance sea voyages safer and more predictable, much easier to accomplish. And you didn't have to worry about all of your goods getting fucked up over the sea while trying to do some sea trade. There was a big demand for exotic goods as well. Asian markets especially had a burgeoning demand for African goods like ivory, gold, and slaves, while African markets sought Asian spices, porcelain, and textiles. And then there is the cultural exchange. The period wasn't just about trading goods. The movement of people across the Indian Ocean brought about an exchange of ideas, religions, and art forms. Islam, for instance, solidified its presence in the region, blending seamlessly with local African traditions. The local communities, recognizing the immense opportunities brought by this trade wind, began to engage more actively in trade. God damn, my brain right now is still a little fuzzy from the party that I did yesterday. I should not have partied as hard as I did. I'm a little out of it. It's fine. Many Swahili families who traditionally might have focused on local trade or fishing began to extend their reach. They established trade agreements with foreign merchants, acted as middlemen, connecting the African interior with the West Coast, and some even ventured on trading expeditions across the ocean. For these families, the Swahili resistance was a golden opportunity. And I'm talking like golden. These motherfuckers got super rich. Their newfound wealth from international trade often translated into increased social standing within their own communities. So it made them feel better because everyone else was like, oh man, like they got so much money. Like that's so cool. Good for them. I mean, they sold a bunch of people and like kind of fucked over our own people, but who cares? They're like super rich now. And they built grand stone houses adorned with intricately carved wooden doors, very fancy doors. And I am talking like some of the fanciest doors you have ever seen. Let me kind of just like really get into like how some of these doors look. So just to kind of get an idea of what the doors were like, we had the material and craftsmanship that was spent on it, right? So the primary material used was typically hardwood, often teak, which was imported from places like India. This not only provided durability, but also offered a dense canvas for very detailed carvings. The mere choice of such high-quality wood was an initial sign of affluence. It was very much a rich person flex thing to do to all the poor people around them. Then we had the architectural origins for it, so the design of these doors drew inspiration from various sources. The Omani influence was evident in the rectangular shape and the absence of an arch. However, there are also Indian influences, especially in the use of large brass spikes on the doors, originally meant to deter elephants from charging at doors in India. These spikes became decorative symbols of protection and strength in Zanzibar, which kind of makes sense because if it can stop a fucking elephant, it could probably stop most other people too. And then we had the carvings and motifs. So the real essence of these doors lay in the very elaborate carvings. Skilled craftsmen would spend weeks, if not months, chiseling very intricate patterns and motifs. Common themes included chains, signifying the homeowner's involvement in the slave trade, and flowers, or rosettes, symbols of prosperity, because, their wealth is blooming like flowers. Fucking assholes. Some doors also featured verses from the Quran, invoking blessings and protection. Very standard shit. There is an interesting story, though, where one merchant decided to have what essentially was a carving of him and his family eating food and then like slaves underneath looking starved out, which, just let me read this little anecdote that I found. So it says, in the bustling streets of Zanzibar, where wooden doors stood as symbols of wealth and power, there was one door that was the talk of the town, often eliciting chuckles, gasps, and murmurs of disbelief. The wealthy merchant Alim, known for his ostentatious display of wealth and penchant for satire, had commissioned a door unlike any other. It was carved with immaculate precision. The door depicted Alim and his extended family seated grandly around an opulent feast, their faces brimming with contentment, very, very happy. Surrounding this lavish spread, his numerous children and wives appeared joyously alive, in stark contrast to the grim reality faced by the city's less fortunate. Most of the poor people at the time, either they had a kid or a spouse that were dead. And so it was definitely a slap in poor people's face. Yet the audacity of Alim's design didn't end there. Below the feasting family was a group of emaciated slaves that were chiseled into it, their eyes wide and mouths agape, appearing to salivate at the tantalizing display of food just out of their reach. All carved into the door. And if that is not some like fucked up rich person thing to do, I don't know what is a fucked up rich person thing to do. Okay. Next part of this is the size and grandeur of the doors. So the sheer size of these doors were imposing. Bigger doors with more detailed carvings were clear indicators of the family's wealth and prominence. Some doors even had a smaller door within them for use for everyday entries and exits. So the main door didn't need to be opened frequently as to not damage the carvings too much. Because, if you're going to spend all this money on this, you want it to look nice for a while. It's such like... This is the original stupid shit rich people bought meme. I don't know if you guys have seen that on Twitter or X now or whatever the fuck it's called, where they'll tweet out like the stupidest shit that rich people bought. And, like there was like that $15,000 gold dildo. There was the diamond encrusted toenail clipper, which is insane. Or just like art in general, like really expensive art for no goddamn reason. And most of the time the art looks super weird and shitty, and I'm pretty sure it's just used for, drug trade. Like turning your dirty money semi-clean. That's whatever. Okay. And then we had the surrounding architecture of the doors. So these grand doors were often set within equally ornate door frames, sometimes inlaid with brass or other metals. Above many doors, one could find a beautifully crafted wooden balcony or mashrabiyya, which allowed inhabitants to look out without being seen, preserving privacy and modesty. So, they're in there just boning right next to the door, being like, oh, God, yeah, I'm so goddamn rich. They could look at other poor people as they're doing that, if that was like their kink, which I'm certain that was for some people. Anyways, evolution and modern relevance. As Zanzibar evolved, so did the designs on the doors. Later designs started incorporating European elements, reflecting the island's changing trade and colonial ties. Today, these doors stand as timeless relics of Zanzibar's rich history, drawing tourists and historians alike. But besides like the doors, the influence of foreign cultures could be seen in Swahili architecture, language, and art, symbolizing a truly globalized world at this point in time. In essence, the Swahili resistance of the late 1600s to 1700s really transformed the coast from a regional trade hub into a linchpin of global commerce. The ripples of this transformation would be felt for generations, setting the stage for traders like Tippu Tip and shaping the socioeconomic landscape of the region. Okay, now we're into the early 1700s, or the early 18th century, really. On the Swahili coast, this is where we saw a new chapter unfold as Omani Arabs began to cast their eyes and ambition towards the prosperous trading ports dotting the eastern African seaboard. Their influence was not sudden, but rather a gradual infiltration that eventually brought a significant shift in the political and commercial landscape of the coast. And the reasons behind the Omani interests were manifold. So there was a bunch of trade opportunities. They recognized the Swahili Coast's pivotal role in the Indian Ocean trade network. And the Omani Arabs sought to control and benefit from the lucrative trade in goods like ivory, cloves, and slaves. See, that's how you make money. It's ivory, cloves, and slaves, you guys. Top three items exported. Okay, and then they had this very strategic location. The Swahili Coast offered a vantage point for controlling maritime routes, ensuring dominance over the vast stretches of the Indian Ocean. And then there was a bunch of religious ties. So Islam had already taken root on the Swahili Coast. The shared religious beliefs between the Omani Arabs and the Swahili people acted as a bridge, facilitating smoother interactions and assimilations. While the Omanis were initially traders and visitors, their presence began to take on a more permanent character as they established settlements, intermarried with the local Swahili population, and even began to vie for political power in some city-states. This culminated in the late 17th century when the Omani Sultan, Sayyid Said, shifted his capital from Muscat to Zanzibar, signaling the deep entrenchment of Omani influence. So Omani is huge there. And their impact from this connection was very profound. So with the Omani Arabs now deeply entrenched in the Swahili Coast, trade ties with the Middle East were heavily bolstered, since many of them, a lot of their families were from there. The Omanis introduced new trading partners, techniques, and goods into the mix as well. And then we had this cultural synthesis that happened. So the fusion of Omani and Swahili cultures birthed a unique blend that enriched the coast's architecture, language, cuisine, and much more. The iconic carved wooden doors of the houses again started bearing Arabian motifs now. So now the Arabians were coming in and getting pictures of their slaves carved into their doors. I bet you the Sultan's carved door was just of him fucking a bunch of his wives, or like in his harem, just him going at it. I could totally see that. And I probably should have looked it up to see if that's true, but we're going to pretend like it is. So let's just pretend. Just have fun with me. And then we had the economic prosperity for merchant families as well. So for the merchant families of the Swahili Coast, the Omani connection was a boon. They gained access to broader markets and leveraging their local expertise often acted as intermediaries between the Omani traders and the African interior. So they're that middleman, and the middleman in a lot of these blends and like mixing of two peoples always win. They always get like the most money at the end of the day. So they were there at the beginning and they're, acting for two groups of people. Okay, however, it is essential to note that this period wasn't without its tensions, as the Omani Arabs sought greater control. Power struggles erupted in some city-states, leading to political upheavals and reshuffling of allegiances multiple times. But, it really, this era really marked a transformative period for the Swahili coast. The Omani influence, while bringing about significant changes, also acted as a testament to the coast's enduring allure and significance in the annals of global trade and history. Okay, so now we're into early mid 18th century. So the mid 18th century for the Swahili coast, particularly Zanzibar, brought with it a darker, more lucrative business, the trade in human lives, and the magnificent ivory of African elephants. That's right, good old slave trade, getting these guys here down to the south to sell the man and the laborers over to the Americans. Fucking asshole southern racists. Okay, anyways. As the appetite for luxury labor grew globally, Zanzibar, with its strategic position, became the fulcrum on which the scales of this morally tumultuous trade balanced. So yeah, you have a lot of like the slave trade index to these fuckers here. So yeah, it's awesome, right? Several factors fueled the rise of slave and ivory trade. There's a growing demand, first off. So in the colonies of the New World, like, again, America, particularly the plantations in the Americas, the insatiable demand for laborers rose exponentially. Simultaneously, the opulence of the era saw ivory, with its smooth, white luster, became a coveted material for the art and luxury items in Europe and Asia. I had to get myself an ivory wig. I don't know if you guys have watched Community, but the older guy, oh my god, I'm forgetting the actor's name. Anyways, the older guy, his character's dad was like this southern gentleman and definitely had ivory from here. Like an ivory wig is like a joke in there, and I just kind of find that funny. That little connection here is kind of hilarious. So and then there's also the very real geographic advantage. So Zanzibar's strategic location made it a neutral entrepot. The island sat at the crossroads between the African interior, where slaves and ivory were sourced, and the broader Indian Ocean trade network, where they were sold. And then there's a political patronage for it. So the ruling Omani elite, recognizing the profits to be made, fostered and protected the trade. They established trade routes, brought in experienced Arab traders, and offered protection to merchant caravans. These fuckers made it so much easier to sell humans, essentially. They protected people transporting humans into slavery. They made sure that this trade would happen because they definitely had an economic interest in it by having tariffs and other taxations come in for using their hub, essentially. Assholes. Could have, honestly, if like they weren't protected and enough people were able to fight back then, slavery might not have been as big of an issue as it became. So we also have some consequences because of this. So there's an economic boom for merchant families. With the high demand and lucrative nature of the slave and ivory trade, families with resources and connections saw an opportunity. They ventured deeper into the African interior, navigating the treacherous terrain and establishing trading posts. Their endeavors reaped enormous profits. catapulting many of them to unparalleled heights of wealth and influence. They had that go fetch him money where they could just be like, I want this person fetched for me. Go get him. And then they're like, well, I need like, X amount of money. I'm like, I don't care. Take whatever you need. And they had that sort of fuck you money. It was in this climate that families like that of Tippu Tips would have laid the groundwork for their future empires. Then we had the expansion of influence as well as a consequence. So as traders and merchant families ventured inland, they not only sought slaves and ivory, but also established their dominion. They influenced local leaders, sometimes through diplomacy, and at times through force, ensuring their interests remained paramount. There's a bunch of moral and social repercussions as well. The trade brought untold suffering to countless souls. Families were torn apart, ancient communities disrupted, and a pall of fear hung over many regions. The grim chapter would leave a lasting scar on the continent's psyche. But that's fine. They had to make money. They had to make money somehow, right? And you could do that by tearing apart families. Not letting little Timmy see his mother. It's fine. As long as I make money. And fuck the rest of you. At least that's what they definitely thought it was okay. So, it's great. Another consequence is the cultural exchange, right? So while the reasons were nefarious, the deeper penetration into Africa by Swahili and Arab traders led to a more significant exchange of ideas, cultures, and beliefs. Just kind of shitty, but they essentially went in there, were like, listen, we're taking your people, and you're going to work for free. So what you guys are doing right now where you're trying to farm, feed your family and shit? Well, imagine doing that, but like, you get to do that for free with some like white guy beating you or something. I don't know what they do. We're going to beat the shit out of you too as we take you over to the port here. So, you don't like that idea? Well, that sucks. Too bad. Anyways, I'm also going to appropriate your culture too. And fuck you if you say otherwise. So in retrospect, the mid-1700s saw the Swahili coast, especially Zanzibar, become the nexus of a trade that was both an economic bonanza and a moral quagmire. Not really a quagmire, more of a moral fuckery. Morals did not matter. It was a numbers game back then. They only cared about how much money they were making. They didn't care about human lives and how they were impacted, which is kind of standard for most people back then, sadly. And while the shores glittered with wealth, with the wealth that they accumulated, the shadows cast by the slave and ivory trade darkened the soul of the region, a dichotomy that would shape its history and legacy. Right, so this is kind of what Tippu Tip is going to be born into. So, trust me, you will need to understand the culture that this area had become to understand why Tippu Tip would make a lot of his decisions, okay? So then we had the late 1700s, with the Omani migration, or the winds of change over Zanzibar's shores. As the waning decades of the 18th century unfolded, Zanzibar and the Swahili coasts witnessed a shift, not just in trade dynamics, but also in demographics. Driven by a combination of political upheaval, economic ambition, and the lure of the promising Swahili coast, a significant number of Omanis embarked on a journey across the sea to Zanzibar. The migration wasn't just a sporadic influx of individuals, it was a well-calculated move by Omani elite and traders. They brought with them not just their families, but a substantial amount of capital, skills, and a vision to reshape Zanzibar's economic landscape. Right, so the first thing they did was the establishment of plantations. Recognizing Zanzibar's fertile soil and suitable climate, many Omanis invested heavily in establishing expansive plantations. Cloves, a fragrant spice coveted in various parts of the world, emerged as the primary crop. The gold of Zanzibar, these cloves would soon transform the island into the world's primary clove producer. And then we had the economic ripples. So the influx of Omani capital had multifaceted impacts. So local infrastructure developed as Omanis built homes, mosques, and marketplaces. The demand for labor in the plantations surged, which further invigorated the already booming slave trade. We had the entrenchment of merchant families, The Omanis didn't come to Zanzibar to start from scratch. Instead, they sought partnerships with established local merchant families, bringing a confluence of Omani wealth and local expertise. Families who had been trading for generations found their fortunes bolstered by this Omani connection, receiving not only capital, but also access to broader networks in the Middle East. We had the political implications as well as their culture. The Omani migration wasn't just an economic phenomenon, it left a lasting cultural and political imprint. So Omani traditions, governance styles, and even cuisine started blending with the local Swahili culture. The Al Said dynasty's decision to shift its base to Zanzibar also had a huge impact on their overall culture and really further solidified their influence in the region. Which I know I kind of repeated some of that information, but the late 1800s is where that completely came to fruition, right? So the migration to Zanzibar was a pivotal moment. It was an era where Zanzibar's sails, already billowing from the winds of trade, were further filled by Omani ambition and capital. Merchant families, some of whom would produce figures like Tippu Tip, found themselves at the heart of an economic renaissance, laying the foundation for an era of unprecedented prosperity and complexity. Okay, now we're into the 19th century, early 19th century. Let's take a look at the life of Tippu Tip. So in 1832, in the thriving island of Zanzibar, amidst the labyrinth of narrow streets, fragrant with spices and reverberating with the sounds of trade, a significant event occurred, the birth of Hamed bin Muhammad el-Mujabi, who the world would come to know as Tippu Tip. Zanzibar at this time was a bustling hub for commerce. It was the epicenter of the Indian Ocean trade, acting as the nexus between Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Yeah, as mentioned already, they did like moving around their slaves quite a bit. It's very common for Tippu Tip to see a slave get beat regularly during his childhood, right? Because that's what people like doing. Anyways, so born into this milieu, Tippu Tip was not just any child of Zanzibar. He was born into a renowned Arab Swahili trading family. From a young age, the intricacies of commerce, negotiation, and the art of the deal were part and parcel of his upbringing. The environment in which he was raised was one where keen business acumen was not just an asset, but a necessity for survival and prosperity. His family's legacy in the trading world was notable, and this lineage ensured that Tippu Tip was exposed to the world of commerce from a tender age. The lessons he learned from observing his family's dealings, the tales of adventure and peril from trading expeditions, and the nuances of building and maintaining a network in the volatile world of 19th century East African trade, all seeped into Tippu Tip's psyche. These formative experiences were instrumental in molding his worldview and his ambitions. As he grew older, this foundational knowledge, combined with his personal ambitions and the changing dynamics of East and Central Africa, would propel Tippu Tip to venture deeper into the African interior. This journey would not only be in search of ivory, but also to etch his name into the annals of history as one of the most influential traders and empire builders of his time. In essence, Tippu Tip's birth in Zanzibar was more than just the beginning of a life. It really marked the genesis of a legacy that would intertwine with the fate of a continent. Kind of nuts, right? Think about it, like one guy's born, kind of like how Hitler was born. If Hitler was never born, yeah, probably someone else would have done something very similar to him, sure. But take a look at it. These guys are born into a culture that's already already dealing with a bunch of other shit, and they get born at the right place, really, or at the wrong place at the wrong time. Are able to fuck up an entire nation, or interact with millions of people's lives, seemingly because of the circumstances during their time. Then we can look at 1860s, right? So a few years later. So as the 1860s dawned, a new chapter began in Tippu Tip's life. He was no longer content with the coastal trade circuits. He cast his gaze deeper into the uncharted expanses of Central Africa. He was driven by a combination of entrepreneurial spirit and the allure of ivory. By the way, he'd just done what basically his family was doing for a while for his first. Let's see. So he was 1840s, starting to learn about mid 1840s. He was starting to learn trade, and his father had him work in the family business, and he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted more. He wanted the ivory. He wanted the ivory trade, which is heavily sought after in global markets. So he embarked on trading expeditions into the heart of the African interior. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Tippu Tip's approach was multifaceted. He combined shrewd diplomacy with the local chieftains, understanding of regional dynamics as well, and when necessary, force to establish his presence and secure the prized ivory. Some of the ways that he would use diplomacy with the chieftains were he was like, hey, listen, I totally promise to marry your daughter, right? As long as you let me get through here. And then your daughter is going to have like a great life by marrying me. And then the chieftain, not realizing that Tippu probably had promised this to a bunch of other chieftains, agreed to it. And then he just used the daughter as another slave that he could build his empire with. Or something like that. Just some shitty backwards deal where it really only benefited him and did not benefit anybody else. Shit like that was something that he would do all the time. So, as well as the force, he'd just beat the fuck out of people, or, get a mercenary army to kill a bunch of chieftains if needed. So blood and gold is what built these trade routes. So as his caravans ventured further and deeper, they not only sought out new sources of ivory, but also created new trading routes, which would soon become vital arteries of commerce in the region. An artery is a very good way to describe it, because again, those roads were built with blood. Yet the implications of Tippu Tip's expeditions transcended commerce. As he charted paths into the previously impenetrable African interior, he unwittingly paved the way for another wave of explorers, the Europeans. Goddamn white motherfuckers. The late 19th century was the era of the scramble for Africa, where European powers sought to claim their stake in the vast African continent. Tippu Tip's explorations, the routes he established, and the relationships he forged became invaluable reconnaissance for European powers keen on exploration and eventually colonization. Fucking colonizers. And while his primary objective was the acquisition of ivory and the expansion of his trading empire, the ripple effect of Tippu Tip's endeavors was profound. This path he blazed inadvertently opened the doors for those European fuckers, setting the stage for a transformative and tumultuous period in the continent's history. And by the end of the 1860s, his name wasn't just that of a trader, it echoed as a trailblazer. He got pretty famous because of this. A harbinger of changes to come, and an emblem of the inexorable march of commerce and colonialism that the 19th century bore witness to. Okay, and then in the 1870s, it was a very turbulent decade in the life of Tippu Tip and the ever-changing political and commercial landscape of Central Africa. Tippu Tip, now being pretty famous, and in Nyangwe, position of the banks of the Lualaba River was more than just a trading post. It was a symbol of power, a nexus of commerce, and a bastion of influence in the region. And as the decade progressed, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Rival Arab traders, eager to expand their influence and control the lucrative ivory and slave trades, found themselves increasingly at odds with Tippu Tip, who had established himself as the dominant force in that region. So that area was his area. Anybody tried to fuck with it, they'd get fucked up. The situation came to a boiling point when Nyangwe experienced a violent and harrowing attack. Tippu Tip, in the aftermath, was quick to attribute the atrocities to the Arab traders. He essentially just blamed it on them because he knew they were trying to come and trying to take over his area, which may have been true, but may not have just been all of the Arab traders. The reasons for his accusations, again, were manifold. Beyond the immediate disputes over trade and influence, he saw an opportunity. By casting blame on the rival Arab factions, he could consolidate his position, rally local support, and further extend his dominion in Central Africa. It let him bolster his influence and take more power for that area, essentially, by doing it. The strategic move had significant consequences. In the wake of the Nyungwe incident, Tippu Tip's influence skyrocketed. Leveraging the situation, he embarked on a campaign of expansion, establishing control over vast swaths of territory and securing crucial trade routes for Congo, or in the Congo. With every village, river, and force that came under his purview, Tippu Tip's grip on the region tightened. Straight up choking that ivory trade. That was his shit, motherfucker. In the 1870s, Tippu Tip, they were not just years of conflict, but also unparalleled ascent. Nyungwe, a wild scar on the history of the region, became a turning point in Tippu Tip's journey, transforming him from a mere trader to one of the most formidable empire builders of his era. As the decade closed, his empire, spanning from the African coast to the depths of the Congo, stood as a testament to his ambition, his tactical acumen, and his unyielding drive to dominate. That's right. This motherfucker just wasn't good at trading. He was good at leading armies and battles. He basically fought off most of the Arab traders and their mercenaries to control the area, which is nuts. Okay, and then we have here in 1877, right? So that we have a meeting of titans and another guy that we may go over later. So 1877 saw the convergence of two formidable figures in the African landscape, Tippu Tip and Henry Morton Stanley, which, if any of you don't know, he was a very intrepid European explorer on a relentless quest to uncover Africa's mysteries. This guy wanted to uncover everything in Africa. He saw it as like, the motherland for a lot of really cool shit, which I'm not going to get into today. We'll go over his story another time. Anyway, Stanley's mission was twofold. Initially, he sought the elusive source of the Nile, a quest that had captivated Europeans for centuries. Later, his mission shifted to the rescue of Emin Pasha, another emblematic figure of the era. Tippu Tip, with his unparalleled knowledge of the region and vast network, was indispensable for Stanley's objectives. However, the meeting of these two titans was not without tension. Mistrust brewed between them, a product of differing agendas, cultural misunderstandings, and the overarching geopolitical currents of the era. Essentially, Stanley would sip on tea all the time, and Tippu was like, that's disrespectful. How dare you sip on tea and not enjoy some of the drink that I had my slaves beaten out of for you? Like I had to beat the shit out of them to get them to make this orange juice, and you're just drinking your tea, you goddamn British fuck. It really made him mad. It was upsetting him quite a bit. And then Stanley was like, I just like tea, man. What the fuck? Yeah, or something like that. Anyways, Tippu Tip, with his extensive influence in the region, viewed Stanley with suspicion, wary of the Europeans' intentions and the broader colonial ambitions he might represent. He essentially kind of viewed him as like a spy for the British, for the British Empire at that point. He's like, so you fuckers trying to move in on my land and shit? But in the complex web of Central African politics and commerce, pragmatism often trumped mistrust. So despite him mistrusting it, he recognized the potential benefits and chose to assist Stanley. He was like, fuck it, doesn't matter. Right now I get some benefits. So whether driven by mutual respect, the promise of trade, or political maneuvering, their collaboration would have lasting implications. Stanley, with Tippu Tip's assistance, made significant progress in his explorations. The paths they treaded, the rivers they navigated, and the knowledge they exchanged would play a pivotal role in the subsequent European exploration and colonization efforts in Central Africa. So yeah, because of the Tippu Tip, the British Empire and the France, Spain, all of them were able to come in and really fuck up a bunch of shit later. So go you guys. You did good, kind of not at all. And then in 1877, it just really became a very landmarked year. The partnership between Tippu Tip and Stanley, while fraught initially with tension, inadvertently paved the way for the European colonial machine. Their alliance, marked by both collaboration and contention, would reverberate through history, shaping the destiny of Central Africa and leaving an indelible mark on the continent's colonial legacy. Okay. Now we have a few years later in 1884 through 1885, the Berlin Conference. Very important to understand. So the close of 1884 heralded the commencement of a seminal event in the annals of African history, the Berlin Conference. Convened by major European powers, this gathering sought to, quote-unquote, civilize the continent by partitioning it into spheres of influence, thus preventing inter-European conflicts over territorial claims. Yet, its echoes would reverberate far beyond the chandeliers and gilded halls of Berlin, forever altering the destinies of millions of Africans. Which, by the way, that's kind of fucking crazy to think about. So basically, over in Berlin, a bunch of fuckers, rich assholes who were in charge of these empires, decided the fate of a million people who had no say in what they were planning on doing. It's really fucked up to think about. Like, I get it, back then it was a grab for power, and whoever could control the most land had most territory. That's what you needed to do. But at the same time, how does your morality not play into that thought process? You know, of like, these are people. Like, why do I need to interfere with their shit? I barely have enough shit over here, so I need to figure out what to do with it. Anyway, I feel like if they would have just spent more time focusing on their current land and tried building stuff out over there, we could be so much more advanced as a society. But no, people just want power. That's just how the world is. It's a grand old fucking time. So within the framework of this new colonial order, Tippu Tip's prowess and influence in Central Africa couldn't be overlooked. So as European powers jostled to stake their claims, Tippu Tip's dominion emerged as a focal point of negotiations. And then Tippu Tip, recognizing his formidable control over vast territories in the Congo and his intricate network of the trade routes, the European powers acknowledged Tippu Tip as the ruler of a significant stretch of the Congolese interior. They're essentially so this guy's a fucking king. Yeah, how we're kings and people pay us respect and tribute. That's that motherfucker. So while this recognition was a testament to Tippu Tip's unparalleled influence and strategic acumen, it came with its own set of challenges. The Berlin Conference, for all its diplomatic veneer, signified the growing shadow of European colonial ambitions. While Tippu Tip's territory was acknowledged, it was now within the larger framework of European colonial designs on Africa. In the wake of the conference, the political landscape of Africa underwent a tectonic shift. New boundaries were drawn, often with scant regard for ethnic, cultural, or historical ties. They'd split up a region, from these people in a holy site. Oh, you think your god lives there? Well, too bad. I'm moving your god over here and you can't cross it without asking me permission. Even though you've been able to do that your whole lives. Fuck you. You don't get to see your god. Fuck your god. I'm your god now. That's what these European assholes did to them. Tippu Tip's territory would be in those crosshairs. And the years following this conference saw him navigating this new reality, balancing his own ambitions with the ever-growing European presence. His realm, once a symbol of his unmatched trading empire, was now a chess piece in a larger game of colonial geopolitics. The 1884 to 1885 period thus marked a turning point in his saga for Tippu Tip, setting the stage for the final chapters of his storied life amidst the tumult of colonial Africa. Okay, so 1885, right? Tippu Tip came face to face with a new and formidable rival, King Leopold II of Belgium. This fucker was I need to fuck up Tippu Tip and I need to control his area. So while Tippu Tip was a master of the Central African trade networks, King Leopold was a monarch with grand ambitions, driven by dreams of an empire and untapped riches. Their contention centered around the heart of Africa, the vast, resource-rich territories of the Congo. Tippu Tip's influence in the region was undisputed, but Leopold, with his eyes set on Africa's treasures, was not one to be easily dissuaded. Backed by European diplomacy and driven by the outcomes of the Berlin Conference, Leopold staked his claim. The dispute between the two was more than just a territorial disagreement. It was a clash of visions. While Tippu Tip's empire was built on trade and strategic alliances, Leopold's ambitions were rooted in pure exploitation. This difference in approach would have dire consequences for the Congo and its people. And despite Tippu Tip's considerable influence and strategic prowess, the tides of European colonialism proved overwhelming. This motherfucker was able to send in like tens of thousands of men for battles, and Tippu Tip was able to like scrounge up maybe like a couple thousand mercenaries at a time. But Leopold could just send in whoever the fuck he wanted. And Leopold II eventually succeeded in establishing the Congo Free State, effectively usurping vast territories that once lay under Tippu Tip's sway. The impact of this shift was profound and devastating. Under the guise of the Congo Free State, King Leopold II unleashed a reign of terror, extracting rubber and ivory at a horrifying human cost. Forced labor, brutal punishments, and widespread atrocities became the hallmarks of Leopold's rule, leading to the deaths and suffering of millions. Fucker beat the fuck out of like kids, women, and children. Like women, children, men, it did not matter. They were all beaten nearly to death to get rubber and ivory out of there. I was reading into some of the shit, and it was a little fucked up. I'm not posting it here because we're primarily going over his life, but King Leopold II, Belgium asshole, terrible, terrible guy. So in this tumultuous period of 1885, the fate of the Congo was sealed. Tippu Tip, the once indomitable trader and empire builder, found himself contending with the inexorable march of European colonialism, represented by the shadow of King Leopold II. The outcome of the rivalry would shape Congo's history, leaving scars that still resonate today. And some of the rubber trade even still kind of goes on today, which is really fucked up. Or it's been repeated and mimicked in other areas where you can get rubber. Also fucked up. Okay, so in 1886, we have Tippu Tip's retreat and changing tides of power. There was a significant shift in the African geopolitical landscape that was marked by Tippu Tip's return to Zanzibar, the island of his birth. This was not a mere journey home. It symbolized the close of an era and the onset of new dominions. Tippu Tip's departure from the Congo was emblematic of larger currents at play. For decades, he had been the mastermind of an intricate web of trade, diplomacy, and sometimes conflict, stretching deep into the heart of Africa. His influence was unparalleled, and his name synonymous with power and control in the region. However, the late 19th century bore witness to the surging tide of colonial ambitions again from Europe. Yeah, so since Leopold had taken over Congo, a lot of that area had a power vacuum essentially in it, and a lot of his trade routes got like super fucked up. It was a time of like reflection and change for Tippu Tip. It signaled the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, from the age of the Arab trader empires to the epoch of European colonial dominion. Which is really sad. It sucks. But anyways, the final stand was in the 1890s for Tippu Tip, right? Central Africa was characterized by an atmosphere thick with tension. Still kind of pissed about his whole losing Congo shit to King Leopold II. Tippu Tip decided to, start scheming. He's like, I'm not going to end having lost everything. I'm going to try and go get it back. So it witnessed a bunch of sporadic skirmishes and protracted tensions between Tippu Tip's followers, the loyal remnants of his vast trading empire, and the forces of the Congo Free State, which were a bunch of European assholes. Each clash, every confrontation, underscored a larger narrative: the waning days of Arab trader influence and the inexorable rise of Europe in the region. So, for Tippu Tip's followers, this was more than just a territorial dispute. It was a struggle to uphold the legacy of their leader, a testament to their once great empire that stretched deep into the African interior. The resistance was fierce, often driven by a combination of pride, loyalty, and a sense of preserving their way of life against the encroaching foreign power. Bunch of white assholes. On the other side, the Congo Free State, backed by European weaponry and driven by King Leopold's unyielding ambition, saw these skirmishes as opportunities to further cement their control over the region. Each victory, no matter how minor, was a step towards erasing the vestiges of Arab influence and ensuring the absolute dominance of European power. Now, when I talk about erasing, they would straight up, those intricate doors I talked about earlier, burnt, destroyed, any chance they got. Anything with like referencing the Quran, they didn't let these fuckers read. It was nuts. And by the close of the 1890s, the landscape of Central Africa had been irreversibly altered. The continuous confrontations between Tippu Tip's followers and the Congo Free State were not just isolated battles, but signposts of a larger transition. The era of Arab traders, with their intricate networks and alliances, was giving way to the new epoch marked, again, by this European colonial machine, their structures, administration, and exploitation. They were the masters of exploiting people. These fuckers came up with the concept of Egyptians and the slaves that they had with the Jewish people. Like they knew what exploiting people were to get like some shit done for them. They were too good at it. And the impact of their clashes were profound, signifying not just the decline of the trader influence, but also reshaping Central Africa's identity under the looming shadow of the colonialism. The echoes of this tumultuous decade can still be heard today as the continent grapples with the legacies of its conflicts past. A lot of this shit is kind of why today there is this split idea as to like what culture Central Africa should be. Because really, it had become this kind of blend between Arab and Swahili cultures. But then Europe came in and decided to just like try and erase the Arab culture out of it as much as they could. Tippu Tip fought against European erasure of that, which was really cool. And in 1905, we have Tippu Tip's final blow. On the sun-kissed island of Zanzibar, Tippu Tip, the once mighty trader and empire builder on Central Africa, breathed his last. His passing was not just the end of a life, but the conclusion of a significant chapter in African history. Tippu Tip had been a force of nature, carving out a vast dominion in the heart of Africa, setting in motion a series of events and leaving an indelible imprint on the continent. His tales of ambition, rivalry, and conquest had become legend. But by the time of his demise, the world around him had changed dramatically. Europe's scramble for Africa in the late 19th century had led to partitioning of the continent among various colonial powers. The flags now flew over territories that Tippu Tip had once traversed, traded in, or ruled over. Straight up, this guy like ruled over most of Central Africa. What had become Congo was mostly his. Fucking crazy. And the guy was able to do that just by, doing a bunch of trade. And he also killed a bunch of people. But he didn't exploit them as much as Europe did. So, that's one nice thing that he did. So the intricate networks of trade, the rivalries, the alliances, the world that Tippu Tip had known had been transformed under the weight of European administration, infrastructure, and governance. Essentially, his diplomacy meant shit in the face of gunpowder and, bullets. it didn't mean shit when they had the better weapons. Tippu Tip's death in 1905 was symbolic of the broader transitions at play. The age of great African traders, chieftains, and empire builders was fading, making way for a new era dominated by European colonial states, with their defined borders, policies, and bureaucracies. While Tippu Tip's physical presence had been confined to history, his legacy endured in the annals of African history. His name would forever be synonymous with a time of great flux, of transition between indigenous power structures and the onset of European colonialism. As the sun set on his life, so too did it mark the twilight of an epoch. But even as the shadows lengthened, the stories, lessons, and memories of Tippu Tip's era would continue to illuminate the African landscape, a testament to the resilience and spirit of a continent and its people. While this timeline provides a very good overview of his life and his disputes, I know that it doesn't go over enough of his life. I just kind of wanted to give you that brief overview into understanding Tippu Tip, because really, like, his life showed how Europe really fucking hated Africa essentially at that time, or just wanted to like try and control, and how the struggles that he fought was really the same struggles that Africa fought against Europe during the time of its colonialism. And, he was really representative of the people of his time, where a lot of these cultures and, chieftains or empires at the time were just a bunch of tribes that banded together through diplomacy and treaties and alliances that they had all set up. And really, what's fucked up to think about is that some big foreign invader can just come in and wash that away completely, because they could. They had more firepower. They had more men. And there's some things in life where overwhelming odds, you can fight back against it. But eventually, if there's too much to overcome, there's too much to overcome. And that's sadly how Tippu Tip's life and Central Africa's way of life would come to an end here with the beginning of the 20th century. And that ends today's historical quarrel. Guys, well, kind of brings us to the end of today's episode. I'll give my brief opinion on it. Also, sorry about today's episode. I know there wasn't as much detail as I'd normally like. I did not have nearly as much time as I wanted to for writing today's script. So hopefully the snippets that I gave were interesting enough to, at the very least, get a base understanding of who Tippu Tip was, what he represented, and kind of the quarrels of the time, which is really just European colonialism closing in on Central Africa. My main thought was just like how crazy it was that, this kid, yes, born into wealth and luxury, was still able to essentially take his family's little merchant business and turn it into this empire that European powers recognized. Like, they recognized him as like a king, essentially, because of how wealthy and how much influence he had over his region for his trade networks, which is fucking cool. And then I don't know, what Leopold did, some of the shit that I read was awful if true. I didn't have enough time to verify anything, which is why I didn't include it. But some of it included he would like behead people, like have like slaves beheaded in front of their kin, or like beaten in front of their kin to make like the kin more obedient. Just like shit like they would come up with. He purposely did some like European medieval torture shit on them too, which is scary, terrifying, honestly. So yeah, but I didn't get to verify anything yet, so that's why I didn't get it into the episode. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of crazy because, like, I understand why Europe did it. I don't think it was right, and I think the atrocities committed by them are worse than some of the atrocities that Tippu might have committed with some of the chieftains. Because at the very least, he viewed them as people. I feel like the Europeans almost didn't view them as people, or didn't let themselves view them as people because of the way they were treating them. Because it would harm their psyche too much if they did that. So, which is really sad. But they also traded slaves. But there was like a big thing by the time Tippu was alive. I mean, Tippu cared more about the ivory, not as much about the slave trade. So, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Hopefully you found some of this interesting. Let me know if there's anything I can do better. I feel like there's already a couple things I could do better from this episode in particular. But like, you tell me, like, even if it's just like repeating back to me what I already said, like, a little more detail, a few more things, which I promise I'll have in next week's episode, which will be, let me get into that so I can see, because let's see, what do we got lined up? Next week is going to be the Battle of Talus in 751. Oh, that should be a good one. That'll be fun. So we have the Battle of Talus coming up next week. It's going to be lit. Like I said, I'm going to have a lot more research done on that. So a lot more interesting stories, probably a few more jokes This is gonna be more of like a factual one, anyways, guys. Get you your toes dipped into Central Africa and its trade and politics. So, hopefully you like the way that I talked today. I feel like I was able to talk a lot more calmly and more of myself, which is nice. And if anyone else has a birthday on August 19th, happy birthday to us. Hopefully you enjoyed your birthday as much as I did. So, but that's all, guys. Seriously, thank you for listening. Please share this with people. Leave a review. It helps people notice this show. I'd like this show to get more notice, just so I can talk with more of you and get more feedback that way too, I guess is a good way to do it. Because the more people that listen, the more likely I am to get some feedback outside of the people that I typically ask feedback for. But yeah, that's all. You guys keep going, share the knowledge, keep on fighting. My little quarrelers or whatever. I don't know. Do you guys want to be called quarrelers? Let's just call you quarrelers. You quarrelers now. If you listen to the show, you're a quarreler. You like going around the world and finding people and shit. Little quarreler. Okay, you guys have a good one. Bye.